Good afternoon, Rochester. My name is Wafa Al Khalifa, and I'm the Equitable Development Coordinator for Destination Medical Center. I'm here with my colleague, Chow Matala, who serves City of Rochester as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. We welcome you to the May Equity Series episode, and I hope you're all doing well. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today during the noon hour, where we will be sharing with you a new tool and a new topic for this month's episode. I just wanted to remind everyone that all the episodes, the previous episodes, you will find them on the Destination Medical Center YouTube channel. Today's episode is the 24th episode, so we're really building this library of tools and topics and information that we hope that you get to utilize in your organizations and with your communities as a professional development or something to help you discuss the various topics that we touched on this series. And then I just wanted to remind everyone, and maybe this is a kind of an intro also for our topic for today, that Chow and I, when we got together and we decided to form the equity series here and to utilize this platform to share all these information and all these different tools, and how these tools are meant for organizations to commit to utilizing in order to make the organizations more equitable, more vibrant, more diverse. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that in previous episodes, we did touch on these different tools from with different examples from communities nationwide or internationally on how they utilize these tools to make better improvements for the organizations and for their communities. And this reminder comes in a very special time in our community. As we all know, we experienced, our community became viral for the wrong reasons recently. And as our community managing through the situation that you're all aware of, it is really important to remind ourselves that we are the community that decided to make engagement more equitable by piloting community co-design, that we are the community that created this platform for discussing various topics, that we are the community that did make real establish real metrics in the built environment by inviting more women and more BIPOC communities to participate in the built environment careers or businesses. And so as we move forward, I think it's really important for all of us to equip ourselves with these various tools in order to make improvements within our organizations. And we need to equip ourselves also with resources. And in the 23 episodes that we've shared with you, the past few months, couple years, we did not shy from inviting different organizations that they provide valuable resources and information for different communities. And maybe this is the time for each one of you to connect, whether with the Latino Economic Development Center or our local ACLA organization or Pamoja Women. Maybe it's time to connect with, the organization that you're going to hear from today, or you're going to hear from, or you heard from in the past episodes, because without tapping into these organizations and these resources and tools, we are missing out on making effective changes that will lead our community to be more vibrant and more equitable for all people, one person at a time. So I just wanted to share that reminder that, and Chow, my colleague, always reminds me that it's time to stop admiring problems and actually make action. And action begins with you individually as someone who's with us today in this episode. That starts with an action that you can take today by learning something new about your community, or learning something new about a tool that that has been proven to work to make more equitable outcomes. It begins with you, with changing who do you usually meet with? Are you reaching out to different segments of our population to stay connected and to return to the Rochester that we began to know through some of the actions that we have been committing to in the past couple years? And so if you or your organization have any questions about joining the Equity Alliance, and if you have any ideas about Equity Alliance, Equity Series topics, feel free to contact me, or Chow Matala will be more than happy to meet with you, or bring your topic idea into life and see it here through the series for the next couple months. But for today's episode, here we are introducing another tool that can be very valuable, very helpful to organizations that they're looking to make commitments that will lead into positive impacts in the community. I'm really happy to introduce to you Anita Dos Santos. Anita is the Director of Advocacy for the Participatory Budgeting Project. And you'll hear from Anita today, an introduction on what is participatory budgeting, and maybe it will inspire some of us here today to take action and to say, maybe we want to commit to participatory budgeting. Anita, welcome to the Rochester community.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be in this group today to share with you about participatory budgeting. I'm just getting my screen share set up. Can I have a thumbs up or an okay from Wafa or Chow to let me know if this looks good?
Yes,
Great.
it does.
Okay, if at any point anything happens with slides, let me know right away so I can fix. But yeah, let me just open the chat actually so I can see it. So I have it open. All my windows are good. All right. Hello, everyone. Again, like I said, I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm going to be sharing with you an introduction to participatory budgeting, also known as PB. I'll be using PB throughout as a short way to say participatory budgeting because it has so many syllables. And so before we begin, I want to share a little bit with you about Participatory Budgeting Project, or PBP, my organization. We were founded in 2009 and pretty much led, supported, or inspired every PB process in North America since then, with the first process in 2009 being in Chicago. And so our vision is really simple. It's just to collaboratively transform democracy to center community power. It's a big feat, but it's simple in that way. And we have staff all over the U.S. With me in particular, I'm based in New York. And so the way that we do this transformation of democracy is to advocate for participatory democratic processes, like with participatory budgeting in particular. So like supporting community groups who are advocating for this and just trying to learn and understand what this could look like in their context, helping to build capacity to implement PB. And so for cities, organizations, or schools that are ready to implement, we provide support to those folks to implement and to do it well. And then finally, by shaping the field, by supporting researchers and publishing tools and materials that help to make PB easier to do and even better. And so share a little bit of an agenda of what we'll be going through today. I'm going to share an introduction to what is PB, talk a little bit about where PB is happening, a few extra things I think you should know if you're thinking about implementing PB in your context or advocating for it. And then I'll share it's inverted actually. I'll share some resources first, and then we'll move into a Q&A. But before we begin, I want to do some introductions, and that's why I wanted to have the chat ready. Thank you, Khadijah, for that welcome. Because I know some people have already put in their names and their role and things like that. So if you already did that, that's all right. But if you haven't, I would love to see who I'm speaking to. And I would also love for you to answer this question. So if Rochester's or your organizations, you can pick one or the other or both, could talk, what would it say? And so, there's a quote that some people attribute to Martin Luther King. It says, budgets are moral documents, right? And so they mean something. It's more than just numbers. And so, yeah, what would your budget say? And I want to say, no pressure to think too seriously. Your answer can be like lighthearted. It could be the budget is saying, no one understands me, right? That might be true. But also, it could be something like, I ensure that everyone gets the education that they need, or like, I value community safety, or I already see like buffers, like people are putting things in the chat. And so, as you all think about this, I want to share a little bit about my introduction. And so, I mentioned that I'm based in New York, and I've been at PPP for about 2 years. And before that, I used to work in the affordable housing world, particularly in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods here in New York and in Brooklyn in particular. And at this job, I had to get really good at saying no to people. And so people would say, well, like, what about this solution to how to solve this affordable housing crisis? Or what about that? Or can we do this and that, And also a lot of the times just like, can you find me a place to live? And a lot of the times the answer I had to give was no, because the resources weren't there. There was like the avenues to get those things just were not there. And so, like, understandably, that was really disheartening, frustrating for me. And I did that for a few years. And, I learned about PB, and like I think there was PB on my college campus years ago, and I saw it as this kind of niche thing that these progressive students were doing to like funnel money, and I voted for more printers, and it happened, but I just thought, this is something that just happens in schools or something. And actually, like later I found out that PB can actually happen on like many different levels, including like organizational, citywide, statewide. And I got really excited about that because I saw it as this opportunity to say yes. So, PB gives people the opportunity to say, like, to their communities, like, yes, you know exactly what you need to solve your problems. Like, yes, that's a great idea. And yes, let's do it, right? Like if your idea wins in PB, like it gets done. And that is something that really excited me about PB. And I'm here today. I'm the Director of Advocacy at PBP, and I work with folks kind of in all places in their PB journey, as we sometimes call, whether you're just like finding out about PB and learning about it and need some information to go deeper, or you're like, I'm running a campaign in my city, I'm gonna get the city council to allocate this money, or you're like, we're doing it, we're ready, we just like need the tools to get there. I work with folks in kind of all of those places, and it's really exciting to see how PB is creating space for like more participation all over the country, all over the world actually, but in particular all over the US. Okay, so I'm gonna look through this chat, and I am seeing that no one is actually answering my question about if your budget could talk, but it's okay. Maybe you were just really
I
into
think
my
I'm the only one
story.
who answered,
Yeah, you're the
Anita.
only one.
I said
But
this restricted budget.
yeah, restricted. I mean, as we keep going, if like a word comes up for you or like a phrase or something, like feel free to pop it into the chat. Um, Restricted, I mean, I wonder like how does that show up in the way that like when we're trying to do things for our communities, right? Or even when we're trying to get knowledge, like that can mean so many things. And so if we had time, I would say like, what do you mean by that? And we can kind of dive deeper into that. But it's something to think about, because budget is more than just like a spreadsheet with numbers. Awesome. So I'm gonna ask you to use the chat again. And I want you to just put a number this time, just one through four. And I would like to hear, how familiar are you with PD? And so like, if you've never heard of it before coming to this presentation or like getting this invitation, put a one. If you're all the way on the other side and you're like an expert, you know about tons of PB processes, put a 4 in the chat. And then if you're somewhere in the middle, put a 2 or a 3. I just kind of have a sense of who's in the room. Okay, cool. I'm seeing 1s and 2s. I see a 3. Okay, awesome. Yeah, lots of 1s and 2s. Okay, another 3. If you put a 3 in the chat, would you mind typing into the chat like a process you're familiar with or something that you saw in terms of PB? I would love to just see and for others to see as well. But this is great. I'm seeing a lot of 1s and 2s, and so I'm not going to waste any more time because we're really here at the point of introduction. So I just want us to start to get going, right? So I'm going to start us off with a basic definition so that we're all on the same page about what PB is, right? And I'm going to close the chat at this point, okay? So PB is a participatory, a democratic process where community members directly decide how to spend part of a public budget, right? So it's not a consultation where the community just shares suggestions with the real decision makers, and then they eventually decide. It's also not just a one-day event. It's an annual cycle of meetings and voting that gets incorporated into the existing budget process. And in essence, PB is a way that real people can make real decisions about real money. Let's go a little deeper. So we're going to see how this all works by going through what the participatory budgeting cycle actually looks like. And we're going to start with the first phase, which is design. So after a pot of money has been identified, we start by designing the process. And in this phase, a group of folks from diverse backgrounds that are representative of the community come together to form a steering committee that makes decisions about how the process is going to run. And so they're going to be making decisions about who is eligible to vote, who can submit ideas, what ideas are eligible, and they're also going to make some decisions on outreach strategies. I can't even remember if I said this at the top, like I'm going to be talking about PB both at the organizational level as well as at the city level. And so you'll see me kind of go back and forth with my examples. I want you to know that this is applicable on multiple levels. All right, so after we design the process, we kick it off with the community by brainstorming ideas. And so ideas can be collected at in-person events where people can come together and kind of brainstorm together. They can also be collected online, and ideally it's a combination of both of these methods. After all of the ideas are collected, we convene a new group of volunteer community members known as proposal developers. It says budget delegates on the slide, but it should be proposal developers. And so they will take these ideas that were submitted and develop them into concrete project proposals. And so, for example, let's say there's an idea for new computers at the school. And so the proposal developers will have to ask questions like, how much does the computer cost? How much room do we have for computers? How many students do we have? And what's the ratio of students to computers that's needed in a school typically? What's our budget and how many computers can we afford? They will think through all of these things. So, researching needs in the community, feasibility, and the projected impact. And they do this so that everything that makes it onto the ballot can be implemented impactfully, right? Which brings us to the vote. And so after the proposal developers go through all of the ideas and they vet them, they might eliminate some and come up with their final ballot, we have the vote. And so we encourage, city processes to hold voting over multiple days or even weeks so that as many people as possible have a chance to both find out that voting is happening and then actually vote. And then voting can happen at in-person events. It can also happen online. And we want to also, one of our best practices to ensure that there's outreach being done to those areas that are, harder to reach, that might not as easily find out, that typically might not participate, so that we can have, real robust participation. Same goes in an organization, right? And so depending on your context, you might find that, let's just all do voting all together one day because we're so small. Or, we need to spread it out because we want to make sure that we get our our community members in the door, whatever it is, but this is going to be dependent on the context. And you'll hear me talk about how PB is a framework, but it can be adapted to many different contexts. And then finally, we're going to fund the winning projects. This is like probably the most exciting part because people actually get to see their ideas that maybe was just one sentence on a paper at one point actually come to life. And so we fund the ideas until the money runs out. And then the last step is really evaluation. And so we want to evaluate to measure the success of the process based on any goals that we identified. And so things that we can evaluate are like, if we were hoping to have this many voters, how many did we actually have? How many people came out to submit ideas? Or how did the project management go for this, in terms of the staff at an organization who were putting this together, or the way that city agencies work together? There's many things we can evaluate, and we want to do this so that the next time we do PB the next cycle, it can be even better. All right, so I'm going to do a review because I know I just went through a lot. And so again, the participatory budgeting cycle, we begin by designing the process with a steering committee. This community submits ideas. Those ideas get refined and turned into, robust proposals that the community can then vote on. The community will vote, we'll fund the projects, and then we'll evaluate and start all over again. That's why there's a little arrow, because it's a cycle. So at this point, you might be thinking, this is so exciting. How can we do this? Like, what kind of budgets can you use? And actually, if you have your fingers ready, I would love to get some audience responses here. Like, what kind of budgets do you think could be used for participatory budgeting? Also, if it's easier to come off mute, feel free to just come off mute. I would love to hear from you all. I'll give it a second or two. Don't be shy. Open-ended grant awards. Great. Yes. Community grants. Yes. Okay. Anything else? Federal grants, pilot programs. Yes. Awesome. All yes. And so I'm going to close the chat now, but keep responding. The answer is, if you can spend it, you can do PB with it, basically, right? PB is very versatile. And of course, each budget is different. And so the PB process might not work the same for every kind of budget, but it's very versatile. And so PB allows communities to be creative in how they adapt to help them make collective decisions on how to spend funds, right? And so I want to show you this little image here of the budgeting pie. And it is because I want to emphasize that as we're exploring PB today, it's about sharing decision-making power over one part of the budget, right? We're not talking about the entire organizational budget or the entire city budget. We're talking about one slice of the pie, right? Because the rest of our budgets go to all of these different things that we need to spend on. And there are other places where we can also share decision-making power, but I want to just make this distinction. And there's tons of other areas, and you might need to kind of play around and see what's going to work for your particular context in terms of doing a PB process. And so now I just want to share some other areas where typical sources of funding for participatory budgeting, right? And so we see a lot of city, county, state, and federal budgets used for PB. Non-governmental sources like foundations or nonprofits. So a lot of folks put in the chat different kind of grants, and so certainly can be used for PB. Not sure if this is something that folks have in Rochester, but if elected officials like city council members have discretionary funding, this can also be a source of funding for participatory budgeting. Schools, like I mentioned, my college, but we also see high schools, like middle schools, elementary schools, using part of their funds for participatory budgeting. Public agencies like a Department of Health, for example, at both a city and state level can do PB. And then, finally, police and carceral budgets. And we see this with like divest invest projects where there might be some funds divested and then reinvested back into the community, and the community decides how to spend those funds through participatory budgeting. And so again, each budget is going to be different, and so we can be creative in how we adapt. And so now the question of like, where is PB happening? So PB is happening everywhere, and I just included this map. We have this map on our website, a whole bunch of dots. And like you can see that there's tons of different types of processes, and they're happening all over the US. This is also just the US. I think that the most recent number I saw for worldwide, there's like 7,000 locations around the world doing participatory budgeting. I'm going to talk about 3 processes in particular that I want to share with you to help this come a little bit more alive, go from like the theory of the cycle to seeing how this actually can work. I'm going to share an organizational process, a city process, and a school process to show you a few different ways this can look. So I'm going to start actually by talking about a organizational level process that we've actually done here at PBP. We call it PB squared. And this is what, like we say, this is like how we practice what we preach, and it's our internal per PB process. And we open it up to our national network of partners. Basically, like anyone who's committed to like meaningful participatory democracy is open to participating and like having a little bit of say of the work that we take on. And so we've done this since 2012. And it's a percentage of the individual donations we get. And so, you know, for those folks thinking about like your organizational budget and what's restricted and what's not, you know, taking from individual donations, that's a source of funding that's not restricted. And so it gives us the flexibility to run PB with that source of funding. And so I want to talk a little bit about what stands out. And so, you know, in terms of like, what does this do? What's the impact? It helps us to engage our network by like sharing the word about PB, because that's our entire purpose. You know, it clicks very easily to make the connection between like we're PBP and we're running a PB process, come be a part of it. But you might think about, how does this help me engage my network in other ways where I'm already trying to engage folks? I'm already trying to get people to talk to me, get people involved. How can I use PB as a way to get people to come in, right, and engage? For us, it was also, you know, a way to fundraise for hard to fundraise for projects like, you know, staff wellness, and you'll see an example of that in the following slides. And then, you know, 2 key ways that were important to making this work for us were that staff participated in aligning projects from supporters with internal planning from the beginning. And so we made sure that, you know, we had staff involvement as well as community involvement to make sure that, you know, people are submitting ideas, but we want to make sure that this aligns with, you know, what we do, that aligns with our capacity. And staff also consented to everything before it went onto the ballot, so that, you know, again, we can ensure that everything that makes it onto the ballot can be implemented impactfully, meaningfully. And I'm going to share 2 examples of winning projects. One of them was a Treat Yourself winning project, which was just support for staff in like remote work environment to just kind of like have a flourishing environment where they could work, right? And so some funding allocated for that. And then another one was language access for some of the PB materials. So we had some of our materials translated to Spanish. And this was like, you know, a need that emerged. Someone submitted the idea, and with the funding that we allocated to the PB process, we were able to pay for some of those materials to be translated. And so, you know, this is something that already aligns with our goals and our values. And it's surfacing like a real need. You know, we don't have to imagine like, what does our community need? They're like asking, they're telling us, and, you know, we can do it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit later about like efficient spending. This is a way to spend funds efficiently because we don't have to guess like, what's a good idea? What would people like? People are telling us, and then that's where we put the money, right? Okay, next I'm going to share, this is a different Rochester, New York. This is a city level process, right? And so this process was led by a nonprofit called the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Project, and they used funding from CDBG, so Community Development Block Grant, to fund this process. Some of you who are in the nonprofit or like government space might be familiar with this source of funding. And the goal of this process was to use PB to fight poverty. And so one of the criteria that the steering committee came up with is that in order to be eligible projects, that the projects had to benefit people experiencing poverty, or they had to address poverty in some way, right? And I think that like this example is an excellent example of how, different sources of funding can be used. I talk about that a little bit in the next slide, but some of the winning projects were like Emergency Housing Assistant Fund, a tiny house project, and a 24-hour childcare program. Thinking in particular about a 24-hour childcare program, right? Like if we think about very quickly, like why might that not already exist, or why might there not be funding for that already? If the folks making the decisions for like where to allocate funding for childcare are working 9 to 5 jobs, right? And they don't see that there might be a need for second shift workers, overnight workers. They might also need childcare, right? But those folks who need that are not always at the decision-making table. And PB creates this opportunity for those folks to be at the table and, submit their ideas, not just submit, but also like really be there developing these ideas into like what they will become. We start to see things that are really different than what we normally see. And I think that that's really exciting to me. And so some things that stand out are that, because this process was designed with the key issue of poverty in mind, demonstrates that we can shape projects based on community priorities from the outset. This was like a clear priority that the community stated in the beginning, and it was woven into the eligibility criteria for projects. And so, we ensure that the process is really focusing on that goal. It demonstrates that a lot of different funding sources can be used, in this case, a CDBG funding. One interesting thing too is that this represents kind of a shift in PB in the United States, where historically funding has focused on funding capital projects like infrastructure. So think of things like sidewalks and parks and things like that, towards program funding, right? And so like some winning projects in this process went through services and programs that community members could access. And then I kind of talked about this in the last slide, but like the winning projects show that valuing lived experience is critical to shaping effective solutions. All right, this is the last example I want to share with you all. It is an example in Central Falls, Rhode Island. So I said it was just going to be schools, but it's actually a little bit more than that. And so this is a great example of how we can see PB growing over time. And so in 2020, the school district in Central Falls, which is a city with about 20,000 people, like 20,000 residents, they dedicated $10,000 to a small PB process. Schools ran it. And then in the summer of 2021, the students and the parents in the school district were given the opportunity to decide on how to spend $100,000 in ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funding. This is also known as COVID relief funding. And so over several weeks during the summer, they met on how to decide to allocate money towards extracurricular activities. And this process was so successful that it inspired the Department of Health in the state of Rhode Island to run another process as part of their Health Equity Zone initiative. And so they ran this as a combination in the zone of Central Falls, which is that city with 20,000 residents, plus Pawtucket, which I think had about like 75,000 residents. And the residents were given the opportunity to decide how to spend $385,000 on the conditions that help us to stay or become healthy, also known as social determinants of health, right? And this is another example of how we see the Department of Health, because the funding is coming from them, they're going to run a process focused on social determinants of health. And so that's baked into project eligibility, and which helps us get those outcomes that we want to see. And so in that Department of Health process, some of the winning projects were a sprinkler water park and an outdoor fitness park. They also launched Ending the Stigma campaign, a mental health campaign. And so I love talking about Central Falls because there's PB happening in these different places from multiple sources of funding. And, more and more people are seeing that, like, yes, I should have a voice in how these public funds are being spent. And I want to be at the table. And, and the more that it happens, the more that we see, like, it's so possible. And so, how do you ensure, if this is like interesting to you, and I'm assuming that it is because you showed up here, how do you ensure that a PB process is successful? And so I want to share a few different things. And the first thing that I want to say is that, before I even get into these kind of things that we can do, is to say that if we want to ensure that PB is reversing power imbalances, not just like reinforcing them, we have to make an effort to make the processes like intentionally inclusive and equitable. And so, like, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I just want to say that this does require intentionality as we come together and design, right? And so, the first thing is time and energy, right? And so PB requires, sorry, let me say this in a different way. Making decisions in this way, different than the way that we normally do, does take more time and energy, right? And so I think the first step is for us to just like acknowledge that it does and design a timeline that fits that time frame, right? And so if normally the decision is just made by 3 people and now you're going to open up to a ton more, maybe an hour meeting is not long enough, right? And so maybe we're going to need a lot more time. We're also going to need a lot more people power. And so let's allocate that in the beginning so we can just, plan around that. If you're, a lot of these are centered around organizations, because I know a lot of folks here are in that space and are thinking about what could this look like at the organizational level, starting to take a look at the existing organizational structures and power dynamics, where like tough conversations can arise, right? And just start to address those from the beginning, even just in anticipation of what might come up. And then being intentional about who participates in each phase, right? And so, especially in the steering committee, designing the process and the proposal vetting process are the most like labor-intensive phases. They're also the ones that will like shape outcomes the most in terms of the steering committee that's going to be deciding on project eligibility and the voter eligibility, as well as like how to do outreach. It's important that those folks are folks that are like really representative of the community so that they can speak from their lived experience of what will work well. And let's ask ourselves, like, who's being centered through, how there is representation in that group of people. So like who's being centered, who will do the work, and, how does this align with our organizational priorities? Ensuring that all the projects on the ballot are feasible. This is essential for, I think, a few things. So number one, when folks vote in PB, their vote is binding. And so whatever wins gets funded because we set aside that money in the beginning. And so what we want to avoid is a situation where a vote is going to be like overruled, which is why we want to have the assurance that everything that's on the ballot, that everything people are voting for, can be implemented if it does win. This also goes for, the folks who are going to be carrying out this work. And so I'll use a city level example. If one of the projects is something to do with a community garden, a dog park, a playground, and the parks department and the city says, like, we don't have staff to support like maintenance of this over time, or like we can't build here, or whatever kind of thing, we want to get their buy-in because they're the ones who are going to have to do the implementation, and that's essential. That's a really important role of proposal developers. In the same way at an organization, thinking about, for example, the internal process that we have, we want to make sure that whoever is going to be responsible for carrying out that translation project can actually do it, that it's really possible, right? And it's important to get that before we publish that ballot. And then finally, just creating clear accountability for completing projects, right? And so again, that trust, we want to show people that PB is going to do what it says that we're going to do, what we said, so that next time we say, like, come participate with us, come do PB, or come do whatever kind of engagement, that people can trust that we're going to follow up on our word. All right, so I want to end kind of on a positive note here to talk a little bit about what can PB do, what's possible. And so PB helps us to practice and build the kind of democracy we want to see in the world. We want to see more participation. We want to see a diverse table. We want to see people making decisions about their own lives. PB is a way that we can do that. It leads to more equitable and effective spending. Again, like if there are parts of the budget where we're already going to be spending on, if we hear directly from the community, like this is where we need those funds to go because this is our need, we know that that money is being spent now in an efficient way where it's really needed. It helps us to shift and share decision-making power within our organizations as well. And then finally, it can increase engagement in our work and foster leadership development. So thinking about that steering committee, those steering committee meetings where people are being asked to think about, building this process, that fosters leadership, right? If we think about like bringing in young people to the process, this can happen at the city level as well as organizational. And then proposal developers, one of the things we find in city level processes that people leave with a much deeper understanding of their leaders who have to make decisions based on limited budgets. And so, for example, somebody might come in and say, like, we want to repave the entire city. And then they learn how much it costs to like do sidewalks for one city block. And they're like, oh, maybe that's why my elected official didn't do that. Because it's so expensive and I see that we don't have the money in the budget, right? So people start to understand, and that's so important to kind of build trust between community and government, as well as like just, even in the organizational context to build trust and to develop leaders. We also see impacts in terms of like people being more civically engaged after participating in a PB process, young people, thinking about the ways that they'll be asked to step up. These are all like great opportunities. And if these things I'm naming are goals of your school, of your organization, of your city, and you're thinking, how can we do this, right? PB is a way to do that. PB is a way to accomplish those goals as well. It's about more than just the winning projects. It's about the process itself. All right. So what is next? So again, I think you're here because you're interested in bringing participation to your organization, to your city. So like, what can you do with what you just learned? I have like 3 little things that you can walk away with and you can do. And the first one doesn't even involve money. I'm going to invite you to just think outside the box a little bit. So like, how can you create avenues for wider participation in non-budget decision making? And so like, think about policies in your organization. A really quick example is like, I know a director of operations who was tasked with writing a new dress code for her organization. They work supporting youth with alternatives to incarceration. And the CEO said, like, the only thing that's important to me is no jeans because everyone might be asked to like show up to court on a whim and like no jeans. Okay. Other than that, it was like free reign. And so, this director could have really easily just been like, let me just write a dress code, find a template, whatever. But they actually like sat down with the entire staff and wrote two different dress codes based on gender, and like sat with everyone and got to hear like what was important to them, and reported that there was so much more buy-in after this new collective dress code was published because people were part of designing it together, right? And I think that's an example of like, the way that you can invite participation at different levels and in different ways. The next one is I invite you to do some research. And so if you are thinking about budgets, right, like what areas of your organization's or city's budget could use a participatory budgeting, participating approach, oh my gosh, participatory approach to decision making, right? And so this can be like, think about different line items in your budget, like tech, food, books. Remember, like if you can spend it, you can do PB with it. And then thinking about like who should be involved, like is it just staff? Should we involve community, and start to think about those areas, doing some research on the city level as well, right? And then the last thing is, if you feel like you're ready for PB, if you want to learn a little bit more, I'm going to share 2 resources with you. And so the first one is our PB for Orgs toolkit. This is like all free on our website. It's a 2-part toolkit where the first part is about like kind of getting buy-in to do PB at your organization and how to advocate for it. And the second part is about how to actually implement a PB process at your organization. This is on our website in our resource library. And the other one is our scoping toolkit. So this is a toolkit for like elected officials, staff who work in government who are interested in launching PB, and it'll help you understand like what it takes to really do that and lay a foundation. You can also, if you're interested in doing that, you can reach out to me and I'll be so happy to talk to you one-on-one about what that could look like for your context and what do we need to get started. So I'll share here that we do have like a complete resource library on our website that has tons of resources to help you learn. And I want to shout out one in particular. It's the Next Generation Democracy White Paper. If you just open the resource library, you'll see it. And in that white paper, you can hear from decision makers like elected officials who have done PB, and you can hear their experience of like what this has done in their city, what it has done for their leadership and everything. So I want to thank you so much. I have my contact information up here, my email, and then some of the PBP socials and the website for you to get connected. I want to thank you for having me, and I'm excited to hear your questions in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Anita. This was a great presentation. I want to invite everyone to utilize the chat if you have some questions that you want to ask Anita, or if you want to unmute yourself, you're more than welcome to do that and ask your questions. But I feel that our community can see the connection between participatory budgeting in terms of involving more community members in budgeting process, where we have tried something here to involve the community in the design of the project, the design of policies, procedures, or public space, and this tool is called Community Co-Design. What we have witnessed here in our community, through what we've heard from the participants, and how much it impacted the projects, is we've seen real creative solutions to long-standing issues that we have, or unique, diverse perspectives. And so you did touch on the impact of participatory budgeting and how it kind of creates an opportunity for community members to experience what maybe elected officials deal with. But what does it do for the community members as well? That's kind of a question that I had in mind, Anita. What type of impact does it have on that steering committee or those individuals who participate?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think like I have a few things in my mind right now, and I think the first one is that people see that they have a right to a seat at the table. When people go through this process of going from submitting an idea all the way to seeing it come to life, if that's their only involvement, or if they're volunteering as a steering committee member, developing proposals, I think number one, they see like that the usual way of doing things, like I think there's like a start of a questioning there, like why don't I have more of a say on how my tax dollars are spent, for example, at the city level, right? And so this kind of changing in orientation from like budgets are a thing that are complicated and that my elected officials make decisions about, to like, no, budgets are a thing that impact my life literally every day. I can understand them and I can help to like make decisions about how they're spent. I think that's one thing. Other things that we see are like relationships forming in communities, and I think this will depend on like maybe even the size of the community or how things are configured, but there's more connection between community members themselves, one of the impacts that we see that we have data on is like organizations start working together a little bit more because community partners are invited to participate at the city level as well. And then there's other data that also shows that people are more likely to vote in elections. People are also more likely to have non-voting part, like civic participation, like showing up at their community board meetings, showing up maybe to like protest and, other forms of civic engagement. We also see a lot of that happening as well.
Thank you, Anita. John, I see your hand up, but I believe Olivia sent her question in the chat a little bit before you, so I'll read Olivia's question. For people here from Rochester Public Schools, do you consider the SCIP teams in the new budgeting model to be an example of participatory budgeting? Maybe for those who are from Rochester Public Schools could answer this question, but Anita, you did share an example from public schools, so maybe that's kind of drawing or inspiring this question. Um,
I'm not sure what SCIP teams are. Can someone spell the acronym out for me?
yeah, Olivia, if you want to elaborate
I
more.
literally can't even remember. I know they're called skip teams. Much about them, which is why I'm asking about them. I don't even remember what they stand for. I think it's like, yeah. If maybe Jennifer or Lita could say more about that.
Mm-hmm. All right. And maybe we'll get the answer in the chat, Olivia. Hopefully I'm interested to know now. And I want to welcome John because we missed you last month. So we appreciate you being here with us today. And let's hear your question.
Thank you, Anita. I think this is wonderful. And I just was curious, and I just don't know the background, forgive me. Has the city made a commitment in DMC to the process? And if so, how much have you allocated in that budget category to this process? I think I like the model, and I just wondered if there's already been made a commitment to this process by DMC and the city, assuming you're hosts, or maybe this was just general information.
I can jump in, John. Good to see you. I would say the city of Rochester hasn't made the intentional effort in participatory budgeting as described by Anita, but our community building fund grant program follows a very similar model where we have an intentional focus. So it is social equity. So any community member above the age of 16 can go ahead and submit an application that we created. We do have a rubric that goes along with it, and it's reviewed. And then funding is awarded to whichever person or organization has submitted that. The budget for that, John, is $50,000 that we have to spend within a year. And we have seen in our prototype here just the amazing array of different ways that community members are working and things that are important to them to implement within.
I think that's a great start. I think clearly, as Wafa pointed out too, it does, I think, model our community co-design, or would be very complementary to that. And I hope that the city and DMC put up real money. 50,000 is much appreciated, so that people would actually be able to make a meaningful impact through this model. So anyway, I applaud the effort. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we use elements of it, but not in the way that Anita described it. If you think about, and you, John, you're involved. I'm sorry?
Hire Anita and she'll do it for you.
Right? If you remember the Main Street grant and how we had a review committee reviewing the applications from community members, I think it's kind of the seed of maybe something like this, because we were awarded $3 million from Minnesota Deed, Anita, to offer to businesses within downtown. That's for round one. We had round two, and now we have round three. But the involvement of community members to make decisions who gets the grant, it's kind of similar a little bit to what you've described in some aspects, but not fully. But John, maybe it's a coalition opportunity with Ready also, DMC, Ready, City of Rochester, and we put big money in there and we do it.
Well, you've got the big money, so we're happy to be there with you. So absolutely, thank you very much.
You're welcome, John.
Thank you.
So any more questions from others who are with us on the call today? because I did prepare a couple questions in case people are still thinking about some questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. As you talked about earlier, Anita, the budget delegates, and you called them something different. How are they selected from the experiences that or the examples that you have shared? How were they selected?
Yeah,
Proposal developers. There we go.
Yeah. That, and that's on me. We like changed the language recently, and so we're like half updated materials and catching up. But we felt proposal developers is a little bit easier. How are they selected? Great question. So it depends, right? And it depends on the who's like running the process and what they want to do. And so and I think I know like sometimes it depends is an answer that can be frustrating, but this kind of like reinforces PB as a framework and it will look different in every context. I can share an example from New York City, which is where I live. For their citywide process, they used a like sortition model of selecting folks to be part of their proposal development committee. And so they reached out to folks based on like context that they had of folks who had volunteered or submitted ideas previously, as well as kind of like an open call that people could say, I'm interested. And they had a few different benchmarks. And I think, I don't remember all of them, but I think they were gender, race, and age, or at least 3 of them. And they composed the group of proposal developers according to the percentage of the population in New York City. So for example, if there were 51% women living in New York City, they had 51% people identifying women in the group of proposal developers, right? So that's one way. We encourage, I think, like robust outreach, right? And so we want the proposal developers to be representative of the community. And so, for example, like what we don't want, for example, is to say like, oh, you showed up at every board meeting for the past 12, every community board meeting for the past 12 months. You might call it something else in your city, but you should be the proposal developer, right? We don't want only those people to be proposal developers. Like we want the folks who like never showed up to a meeting, who maybe like haven't had time to be a proposal developer. And I didn't speak to this for very long in the presentation, but when it comes to access and like really designing for equity, if we want those people, like we're going to invite them, but for them to show up, we also have to make it accessible, right? So that looks like doing things like this is for more for the city level, but it also goes for organizations. Like, can we reimburse for transportation? Like, can we provide reimbursement for public transportation? Can we make these meetings close to public transportation? Can we provide childcare? Can we provide food? Can we provide stipends for participation so that people are compensated for their time? There's different ways that we can increase access that are important to, if we want diverse representation, we have to think about what it takes to get that.
So thank you so much, Anita. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We really appreciate the presentation you shared with us today. And I want to invite everyone, if you or your organization has any questions about participatory budgeting or ready to make that commitment, feel free to contact Anita. I will make sure to put Anita's email in the follow-up email to you all. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to just remind everyone of an upcoming event that's happening May 22nd. It's the 10th year anniversary for Destination Medical Center luncheon. I will send an email after the equity series today with the link to register. I hope that you're able to join us May 22nd for the luncheon. It will be great to see you there and to hear on how we did in the past 10 years and how can we get you involved in shaping the next 10 years of DMC's 20-year initiative. Thank you again, Anita. Thank you everyone for being with us, and we hope to see you all in the June episode. Stay safe and thank you so much.